Have you ever known something about yourself for a very long time, quietly, privately, perhaps for years or even decades, and wondered whether it was too late to say it out loud? Or maybe it isn't you at all. Maybe someone you love has trusted you with something deeply personal about who they are, and you want to respond well, but you just aren't sure how. If either of these feels close to home, this episode is for you. But before we get into it, I'd like to give a very warm welcome to another episode of the Talk Room series of podcasts. I'm delighted to be joined today, as always, by Ian. Ian is a senior accredited National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society member and the founder of Hope Therapy and Counselling Services, a counselling and coaching organisation offering support throughout the entire UK for individuals, couples, and families across a wide range of mental health concerns, with particular experience supporting people who identify as LGBTQIA+, and people who are neurodivergent. Ian, it's lovely to have you with us again.
Thank you, Wendy, and always a genuine pleasure to be here. And let me introduce you to anyone joining us for the very first time. Wendy is a highly experienced CBT psychotherapist who's been working in the field of mental health and well-being for over 35 years now. She brings a real depth to these conversations, and I always come away having thought about something differently, just as a result of having the chance to talk with you, Wendy.
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you, Ian. So, it's Pride Month, and we wanted to mark it, but not in the way pride content often gets done. There's a great deal out there that's celebratory and aimed at people who are already out, already settled, and already at the parade. And that's wonderful. But it isn't everyone. Today, we want to talk to the people who are often left out of that conversation. The person who is quietly questioning, perhaps later in life, perhaps while married with a family, who isn't sure they're even being allowed to be asking that question yet. And then, in the second half, we want to turn it around completely and talk to the partners, parents, and adult children, the people who love someone who's just come out and who desperately want to get their response right. Ian, this is very much your area, isn't it?
It is, Wendy, and I want to say right from the outset why we've structured it this way. Coming out is almost never just one person's event. It ripples throughout relationships, a marriage, a family, a friendship group. So a really honest episode has to speak to both sides of that. And we'll just spend the first part of the day with a person doing the questioning and the second part with the people around them. And throughout, we'll come back to just a practical question a lot of people are quietly asking, which is, how do I actually find a therapist who understands this, really understands it, rather than one who just doesn't mind talking about it? And we'll give a usable answer to that before we finish today's podcast.
Excellent, Ian. And I like to say from a CBT perspective that this connects closely to work we have done in previous episodes on, for example, anxiety and self-criticism, because so much of what we're talking about today lives in those same patterns. So if you haven't had those, they sit nicely alongside this one. So, is it too late? coming out or coming into yourself as an adult. So, Ian, let's start with the person who is questioning. There's an assumption baked in a lot of our culture that people figure this out when they're young. Coming out is something teenagers and people do in their 20s. What do you actually see clinically?
Yeah, really, really interesting question, Wendy. And I think to start with, let me just say that here at Hope we have a team of people who have really extensive experience of working with people within the LGBTQIA plus community, including in some cases lived experience. And we often see something really quite different from the assumption that you mentioned. People come to understand themselves really at every age. We work with people in their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, 60s, and in some cases even beyond, who are only now beginning putting words to something about their sexuality or maybe their gender. And the first thing I want anyone listening in that position to hear is you are not behind. There is no such thing as a developmental window that suddenly closes on you. The idea that self-knowledge has an expiry date at any point is simply not true, either clinically or humanly. And what's far more common is that people only feel safe enough to explore this once other things in their life have just settled down in one way or another. Maybe it's when there's some sort of financial stability there. Maybe it's when there's some distance from the environment that they grew up in, or simply enough life behind them to trust their own perception.
Okay. Okay. So I'm wondering, Ian, if you could perhaps explain to the audience what, why does it often surface later then? What's actually been happening in the years before? Can you enlighten us on that a little bit more, please?
Yeah, a really, really important question, Wendy. And I think the answer is several things may have been going on, and they can tend to overlap quite often. So, for many people who grow up in a less accepting era, or maybe in a family or a culture or a faith community where those identities weren't necessarily spoken about, or maybe even were actively condemned in some cases, the safest thing the mind could do was simply to put that question away. Not necessarily to consciously lie about it, but genuinely not let themselves to even look at the question in the first place. And the team and I at Pape often describe this as something that was never a secret so much as a part of yourself that lived behind other people's assumptions. And then sometimes something shifts. Maybe a relationship ends, maybe the children grow up, maybe a parent dies. And therapy for something seemingly unrelated can, for some people, just crack open a door. And the question that was put away starts to come back. And it can come back often with a real force, a real vigor to it, and often with a sense of absolute urgency that can feel incredibly, incredibly overwhelming when it does finally arrive.
Very interesting. That's amazing, Ian. And that urgency is striking, isn't it? Because on the surface, you think someone who has waited, say, up to 20 years could wait another month. But what you're explaining, it's that does not seem how it feels.
Yeah, and so often it really isn't. And this is something I really want listeners just to hear, to be gentle with themselves about. There's often a really powerful feeling of just having lost time, a sense of I should be further along this path. I should have known sooner. Everyone else seems so certain of these things. And what we often see clinically is that this should
Hmm.
is itself one of the most painful parts of the process. It's not the identity necessarily that's causing the distress in all cases. It's the self judgment about the timeline that can cause so much pain for many people. And that's something that's really very, very workable in therapy. One of the most freeing shifts people make is moving from I'm so late to I'm arriving exactly when it became possible for me to arrive.
That's a very good way of explaining things. I like that. And again, from a CBT perspective, that's like a textbook example of what we would call in CBT a harsh, rigid rule. Just there, underneath, operating underneath the surface, just right there, there is a correct age for this, and I've failed it. That's the rule, isn't it? And those rules tend to crumble quite a bit once they've been actually said out loud and examined rather than just felt. How do you feel about that, Ian?
Exactly that. Exactly that. It's beautifully put. I think that examining is so much of the work, isn't it? And I'd also gently challenge the language that we use as well sometimes. This phrase of coming out almost implies a confession of some kind, as though there's something hidden that you owe to people. And again, the team and I often just prefer to think of it almost as coming home to yourself, or maybe, as some people put it, inviting people in rather than coming out. And that's not just a nicer phrase, it changes the entire emotional posture from I have to disclose a problem to I get to share something true with the people I choose on my terms.
Absolutely, Ian. You're right. The not knowing, because not everyone who's questioning arrives with an answer. I mean, it's possible that some people just genuinely don't have a label and aren't even sure whether they want a label either.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. We hear that very, very often. And I think it's a really legitimate thing to say. I want to be really clear because I think it really does matter to many people. You do not need to have it worked out to deserve support. You don't have to have it all worked out to reach out. And you certainly don't need a label to begin that exploration of self. Identity for many, many people can be fluid. It can shift over time. And that doesn't mean you were ever wrong. It simply means you were growing, you were evolving in terms of yourself as a person and your understanding of self. And I think what a good therapeutic space does is it's not one that pushes you towards a conclusion. It's one that can sit with the question for as long as the question needs to be sat with. You don't have to arrive at an answer at a particular point. And I think some of the most valuable work we do at Hope in this particular sphere is simply being a place where someone can think about it out loud without anyone, including themselves, demanding an answer by a certain point at certain dates.
Yeah, that's really good. That's such a profound way of looking at things. I want to move on to another area, which is called the weight nobody sees, and why this can be quietly exhausting. And I just want to maybe talk a little bit more about the cost of carrying this weight and the exhaustion behind the weight, because I think people on the outside just simply don't understand, or they just underestimate how tiring it can be to hold a part of yourself out of you. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, Ian?
Yeah, and it really genuinely can be exhausting. And
Mm,
there's a really clear framework for understanding why. So in the research, it's often called what we refer to as minority stress. And the core idea is really simple, but really very, very profound and important. People who hold an LGBTQIA plus identity carry an additional, an ongoing load that others around them don't. And it isn't caused by anything wrong with them. It's caused by simply living in a world that wasn't in all cases built with them in mind. There's that that load is partly external, actual experiences, in some cases prejudices or rejections that they may have encountered along the way, partly internal, the constant low level monitoring of, is it safe here
mm,
with these people in this conversation? And for many, there's what we might refer to as internalized stigma, the negative messages who absorbed growing up, now running quietly against yourself
mm,
today.
mm. Yeah, that's a really good point and very profound way of seeing it that way. And I'm assuming that the figures around this, they're not subtle, are they?
Well, they're really
You
not.
know,
And I think it's worth saying them really quite plainly because they help people feel less alone. The data in the UK consistently shows that LGBTQIA plus people are markedly less likely to describe their mental health as good and considerably more likely to experience presentations such as depression and anxiety than the wider population. And the most recent national survey also found that LGBTQIA plus people are more than twice as likely to turn to counselling or psychotherapy to help manage stress as well. And I want to be really careful how I frame that last figure because it isn't a story of fragility. It's a story of a group of people often carrying more and very, very sensibly simply reaching out for the support that they so rightly deserve. That's not a weakness. That's good judgment under the load that they're carrying.
that's so important, Ian, and I'm glad you clarify that point because that reframe really matters, doesn't it? The way you view a situation is so important. Because I think the risk with statistics like that is because people then start to hear there's something wrong with us rather than we're being asked to carry more, which is a
Yeah.
very different perception of the situation.
Yeah, and that distinction is absolutely everything, isn't it, Wendy? And it's central to how the team here at Hope work. I know it's core to your practice as well. We're very deliberately not in the business of treating someone's identity as the problem to be solved. The identity is not the wound. Where there is distress, it almost always traces back to the weight of the stigma, to the secrecy, to the rejection, the fear, not to the who the person actually is as an individual. And I think at its core, good affirmative practice keeps that line absolutely clear. It's very much strength based. People in that position are frequently extraordinarily resilient. They're extraordinarily self aware and incredibly perceptive precisely because they want to be. And we try never to lose sight of that. It's a really, really important thing for us all as therapists to hold on to.
Yeah, it's to really, make that point, isn't it? That it's about celebrating that and making the invisible bits possibly more visible. And I'm just wondering, I wonder what this weight actually looks like, say day to day, for someone who might not even be naming it as a strain. What does it really look and feel like, Ian?
Again, a really, really important question, Wendy. And it often looks like a kind of background vigilance that never completely fully switches off. That sense of having to edit yourself before you speak, maybe changing a pronoun, dropping a detail, rehearsing a sentence just so it sounds more natural and more neutral. Scanning a new workplace or a family gathering for how safe it is to simply exist. And people describe often to us here at Hope just a sense of fatigue very often that doesn't quite make sense to them. I haven't done much. Why am I feeling so tired? And the answer is that maintaining a managed version of yourself hour after hour is genuine cognitive labor. We we see real overlap here with burnout. We did an episode on burnout
Mm,
very recently, and there's also for many a loneliness that sits underneath everything, even even when they're surrounded by people, because they're surrounded by people who don't actually know them, even people that may have been in their company many, many times before. There's just that sense for many of I'm still around strangers even after all this time.
absolutely, yeah. And how difficult that is for an individual, like you say, the strain on that person carrying that load. And just going back to CBT, that hypervigilance and the self-monitoring, seems to be exactly the kind of pattern that in CBT becomes what we would call self-reinforcing. What I mean by that is you scan for threats. The scanning is absolutely exhausting. And then it keeps the nervous system primed, which makes the next situation feel even more threatening. And round and round and round it goes like a vicious circle. But it responds well if it is being understood and worked with rather than just simply endured.
Which I think is really the hopeful note here, isn't it? None of this is none of this is fixed. When people get the right support, that vigilance can start for many to soften. The internalized voice can start to be challenged and changed over time for many people. And a great deal of energy that was going into managing starts to get freed up for actual living. And we see that shift regularly. It's one of the most, I think, for me, and many of the members of the Hope team say the same thing. It's one of the most rewarding things to be a part of.
Absolutely. Totally agree there. Absolutely, Ian. Okay. And I just want to move on to the next stage. And this is called turning it around when someone you love comes out to you. And Ian, I think this is the main hinge of this episode. So we've spent time with the person doing the questioning. Now I want to turn it completely around because for every person coming out, there's usually a partner, parent, a child, a close friend on the other side of that conversation. And a lot of them are listening to this thinking, I love this person, but I think I handle it badly, or I'm terrified I will handle it badly. So, what do you most want these people to hear? What's your view on that?
And I think I think that's a really important question, and often I think it's important to say that whereas we work with members of the community, we regularly work with the parent, the partner, the child, the friend as well, and we hear exactly what you're saying. And I think what I would say is the very fact that you're worried about getting it right is itself an
Mm,
incredibly healthy and good sign. People who don't care don't agonize. So if you're someone who's been maybe replaying a conversation or worrying you said the wrong thing, that worry comes from a sense of love, a sense of friendship, a sense of compassion. And that matters. I think the single most important thing I'd want a partner or a family member or a friend to understand is this. In the moment someone comes out to you, if we use that phrase, you do not have to perform a perfect reaction. What the person almost always needs first is not eloquence, it's simply a sense of safety, a version of, thank you for telling me, I love you, I'm still here. Doesn't have to be perfect, it doesn't have to be eloquent. We can go back to it 1,000 times over and reword it in different ways.
mm.
But
Yeah.
that sense of safety is the most important thing to start.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really, really wise and very good comment, Ian. Thank you for that. I'm just wondering though, there's probably some people here listening to this podcast right now who didn't react that way because some of our listeners will be possibly carrying really genuine regrets about how they responded to this news for the first time. Can you tell us a little bit more about how to deal with that?
And I think what I'd say is I just invite them to be kind to themselves and then to know something which I think from a counselling, from a therapeutic, a clinical perspective, is actually really quite useful. The first reaction is rarely the whole story, and it is very, very often repairable. If you froze, or if you said something clumsy, or asked a question you now wish you hadn't asked, that doesn't have to be the defining moment in the relationship that you have with that person um, coming out to you. Going back to someone and saying, I've just been thinking about what you told me. I think I didn't respond the way that I wanted. And I just want to say how glad I am that you trusted me. And I want to understand. It's one of the most powerful things a relationship can contain. Repair is not weakness. In relational terms, it's often more bonding than a flawless first response would have been. I think it's a really important thing for people to remember.
And that concept of repairing is a really good one, isn't it? It's about there's always hope, isn't it? There's always an ability to work on the relationship and improve it, and also admitting to a loved one that you got something wrong. That in itself can be quite healing. To go up to somebody and say, to be remorseful and humble and say, I am sorry, but I did mess up and I'm really, really sorry and I really want to make it up to you. I mean, that's such a healing kind of act of love, isn't it? Yeah.
It
Very
absolutely is. It absolutely is. And I think for me, I want to hold both people with real care
mm,
because this is a delicate thing. When a when a spouse comes out, the person they've told is often navigating their own incredibly profound experience at exactly the same time. There's a sense of shock. There's a sense of grief. maybe a rereading of the past relationship. A whole range of questions start to emerge about the future. There can be a sense of anger, sometimes guilt for feeling that anger. And I think all of that is incredibly understandable and incredibly legitimate. And I'd say two things. First, both people's experiences are real and neither cancels the other out. The person coming out is not doing something to their partner out of cruelty, and the partner's grief is not a failure of love. Second, this is precisely the kind of situation where it just helps enormously not to try to navigate it all alone. Some couples move through it and stay together in a renegotiated form of relationship. Some move towards separating with a sense of care, a sense of dignity. And many find that having a skilled third person in the room is what can just make either of those two things possible. Without the interaction becoming destructive. And I guess that's one large part of what the couples work that we do in this sphere at Hope is about. It's that negotiating of what next steps look like and making decisions that work for both people.
Mm. And definitely adult children or parents, it's important, isn't it? Because the dynamics are there, different again, aren't they? And what about sort of those scenarios, Ian? Give us.
Yeah, different, yes, but with common thread as well. So with adult children being told by a parent, there's often I guess a re-understanding of the family's whole story. And that just takes time to make sense of. It takes time to metabolize. And that's perfectly normal and understanding. Doesn't mean to say the relationship is broken. And I think with parents being told by a son or a daughter of any age, the thing I'd most want them to know is that your initial feelings, whatever they are not the measure of you. What you do over the following weeks, what you do over the following months and years, that's what really starts to define things. The door is rarely as closed as it feels in the first hard week immediately after hearing that type of news, where maybe we didn't handle it in quite the way that we might have chosen. And I think families don't have to find their way through that purely on their own. Again, family work exists precisely because there are some of the most important conversations that people have. They're hard to have well without the occasional bit of help along the way.
Mm. Yeah, very good point. Yes. And I'm just wondering, Ian, is there a single most common mistake well-meaning loved ones make? Something people would want to know to avoid?
Yeah, a really important question. I think one of the common ones in the experience of the team here at Hope is making the moment about your own adjustment in front of the person before they've had any room to feel safe. Questions like, are you sure? Is this because of something? What will people think? Even when they come from a genuine sense of love and worry, they just they land as doubt. They land with a sense of distance at exactly the moment the other person needs and wants steadiness. The adjustment is allowed, the grief, the question, the fear, they're all allowed. But I think there's just enormous value in having somewhere to just be able to take those feelings. It isn't the shoulders of the person who has just trusted you. And again, that person may be a counselor, it may be a therapist. And again, that's not a failure to cope on your own. It's just about protecting the relationship whilst you find your feet before you can best support the person that's actually come out to you in the first place.
Okay. Right. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that, Ian. Thank you very much. And I want to move on now to finding the right support, what to actually look for. And Ian, this is the part I expect a lot of people skipped ahead for. So let's be really concrete. The question we hear constantly is, how do I find a therapist who actually understands LGBTQ plus issues? Not one who simply doesn't mind, but one who genuinely gets it.
And I absolutely think that's the right question. And and I think the distinction you just drew is exactly the one that matters. I'm fine with that is not the same as clinical competence and experience. So what you're looking for, or if what you are looking for is what we would describe as affirmative practice, then there are certainly organizations out there that can offer that. And I'll just explain what I mean by that, because I think the words get used very, very loosely. An affirmative therapist works from the starting position that all sexualities, all gender identities are healthy and valid, full stop, nothing. They're not neutral about your identity in the way they'd be neutral about a decision that you're weighing up. They're actively informed about it. They understand minority stress. They don't assume that you've come to therapy because of your identity. And crucially, they've done their own reflective work as well. They've examined their own assumptions rather than just declaring themselves open-minded. And practically, the way you find that person is you ask directly. A genuinely affirmative practitioner will welcome that question. They won't bristle. They won't be offended that you've asked them. They will be able to talk to you about that.
Mm, absolutely. So let's give people the actual questions to ask. How do you feel about that, Ian?
Let's do that.
If someone is interviewing a potential therapist and they have absolutely the right to, what should they be asking? And can you guide us to typical good answers? What good answers sound like?
So, things to think about, and I suggest there are a few. The first thing is what I said just now. A good therapist will never be offended by the question. So if we ask the question, what experience, what training do you have working with LGBTQIA plus clients? You're listening for something that's specific, something maybe that's even lived in some instances, maybe more than somebody that just gives a very general, I treat everyone the same type of answer, which, however well meant, might for some people be an indication that they haven't got quite the level of experience and training as certain other people. The second thing is we might ask something about how do you understand the relationship between somebody's identity and their mental health? And a really strong answer might talk around the distress around stigma, and circumstance, not in the identity itself. And third, if it's relevant to people, are you comfortable working with questions about gender, or with someone who doesn't have a fixed label yet? And maybe also simply, what happens if something comes up that you're not familiar with? You know, if somebody hasn't had the training, just saying, you know, what if I'm saying things that you just have no knowledge and understanding of? What would then happen? And the best answer might be just a really honest answer. A good therapist might say something like, they'll ask, they'll learn, they'll stay open, rather than pretending to know everything, rather than pretending to be the expert in everything.
Absolutely, yes. That's one of my bugbears. We talked about that before, isn't it? Yeah.
We have indeed.
Yeah, I know I can treat everything all the same when I'm that experienced. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And on the other side, I'm just wondering whether you can mention any possible warning signs. What should make someone trust their instincts and then possibly even just close it down and look elsewhere?
I think anything that treats the identity as a thing to be examined or accounted for, any hint of why do you think you feel the way that you do, directed at who you are rather than at what's actually hurting you. I think there's a really important distinction between those two things. Anything that subtly steers you towards a conclusion in either direction. And I think defensiveness, when you ask about their experience as well, I'll say this as plainly as I can, because I think it does matter. Anything resembling an attempt to change or suppress in any way your sexuality or your gender, that is not therapy. It's harmful. The evidence on that is absolutely unambiguous. And no one listening should ever feel that they have to tolerate it. You're always allowed to end a therapeutic relationship that doesn't feel right. So even if you've started working with somebody, if you're starting to notice these things, it is absolutely okay to bring things to an end and walk away. And I would really strongly argue that doing so is not about being rude. It's about showing your self-respect.
Absolutely. And a question I often ask, if somebody has had previous therapy that I come and see, I ask them what their experience was, and if it wasn't good, why that was, because I want to learn
Absolutely.
about what really annoys people and what stops them in therapy. So that's a really good question, and I love to keep the self-respect going and not get to go into that load of defectiveness because the therapy hasn't worked out. Yeah, because there's loads of people out there who claim to be lots of things but aren't necessarily. So yes, very good, well pointed out, Ian. And so let's deal with a practical barrier that stops a lot of people before they even start access. A great opportunity now. Can I do this online if I can't travel? Will that work for me? Or is there one suitable towards me? That's a big issue now in therapy, isn't it? You know, it sort of widened everything by having online therapy. But I suppose people perhaps are still not quite sure whether that's right for them, whether it will work online. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Constant question for us within the Hope team. It really is one of the most important things that we can address, because I think for the client population that we're referring to and the community more generally, it can be the difference between getting the right support and not getting the right support. And here's the reality. if you live somewhere that's really rural, or somewhere that you don't feel safe being seen walking into a particular building, where it's known that your counsellor happens to be, or there's simply no affirmative therapist within a reasonable distance, online therapy genuinely solves those issues for you. And I want to be really clear. It's not a lesser version. The evidence base for working online nowadays is so strong. And for many people, it's actively preferable. You can have your session from a space where you already feel safe. You remove the exposure of a waiting room. Your choice of therapist is no longer limited by your postcode or how far you can drive. The team and I and others work with people right across the UK. We work online with people for any number of different presentations, and we work with people within the LGBTQIA plus community, literally on a day-to-day basis, right the way around the country. Accessibility isn't a compromise. We offer reluctantly. For a lot of people we're talking to today, it's the whole point of it. It's what they want. It's the solution to the problem. So I think that if you're questioning that, maybe just pick up the phone, have a conversation, and allow yourself just to be reassured.
I also think there is a skill in providing remote therapy, and also maybe it's finding practitioners who do promote it and are good at it, because there's certain rules I think which are important with therapy, which I'm sure you will share with people if you actually speak them. Again, it's about getting a good practitioner rather than somebody who doesn't really understand the dynamics that can happen on online therapy. So yeah, really good point.
Mm.
Um, and I just like to uh, focus on perhaps if someone is listening and they're not sure even what they're carrying, even warrants therapy. Because I think that the problem is people hesitate so much, and it's so common for them to hesitate, and then they don't really know whether they should even ask the question.
Mm. Mm. And I think what I'd like to do is really gently just dismantle that word warrants. You don't need to be in crisis to deserve support. You don't need to have it all figured out in order to begin. Some of the most valuable work happens with people who arrived saying, I'm not even sure that I should be here. People that ask questions around their deservingness to actually be in that therapeutic space. So I think if that's taking up room in your mind, if you're carrying a question or carrying the weight that we've talked about, or trying to love someone through their coming out and maybe not entirely sure how, that's already a good enough reason to talk to. You're allowed to ask for help. It doesn't have to be an emergency. And most of life's important things genuinely aren't emergencies.
Yeah, it's so true and so true. Very good points. So thank you for that. And yes, as we come to the end, and this has been such a really important conversation. If you could leave our listeners with perhaps just one thought, whether they're the person questioning or the person who loves them, what would that one thought be?
Really, a really important question. And I think I'd want to say something to both. If you're the person who has been holding a question about who you are quietly, maybe for a very long time. Please hear this. You're not late. You are not too much. And there is nothing about who you are that needs fixing. What may need care is the weight that you've had to carry to get to this point. And that weight can be set down with the right supports. And if you're the person who loves someone who has just trusted you with something true about themselves, you don't have to be perfect. You simply have to be willing. The relationships that come through this well are almost never the ones where someone reacted in a flawless way. They're the ones where someone stayed, kept showing up, and was willing to learn. It's genuinely almost never too late for either of you. And that's, for me, maybe the single most important message I
Never too
just
late.
offered.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's such a genuinely moving place to land. And I'm so glad you've said it. Now, just for anyone listening who has recognized themselves or someone they love in today's conversation, Ian, can you tell people what support is available through Hope Therapy?
Yeah, and thank you, Wendy. And I think this is a really important message to just get across to people. There is genuine support out there. Hope has a team of counsellors that are LGBTQIA plus affirmative counsellors that really live and embrace the values that we've talked about today. Some of those people have lived experience of being within the community as well. We have lots and lots of free resources on the website, lots of free information, and not just the various podcasts that we've done, but go to visit the website as well, which is at www.hopefulminds.co.uk, www.hopefulminds.co.uk. Lots of information there. But we also offer a completely free of charge and a completely without pressure free 15-minute consultation where we are very happy to talk through to people, whether you are the person that's coming out or whether you are the person hearing that, or anything else that's relating to this really important area. We're very happy just to talk through that, to offer ourselves and to explain what support is available. So again, just go to the website or go into our profile here on the YouTube channel, and you will see that information of how to get in touch with us. And I really would genuinely encourage people just to take a look at those free resources as well, because there's some we've designed resources specifically around the LGBTQIA plus community as well. And Wendy, an incredibly experienced CBT psychotherapist, I know that you work with minority stress and many other aspects around what we've talked about in today's podcast. So maybe just help people to understand a little bit more about you and who you are and your experiences and how they're relevant to what's being talked about today.
Yeah, yes, certainly. So my website's wendycastellino.com. And I suppose my specialities really are anxiety, self-esteem and trauma, regardless of people's identity and gender orientation. So I suppose if people are looking for somebody who has actually had a traumatic experience, whatever that could be, anything from accidents, assaults, injuries, it covers a whole range of areas. I specialize in that, and also depression and anxiety. as well. So I think if anybody's looking for somebody who's perhaps more talk about this kind of speciality, I think Ian, you're the person to go to because we have different specialities. But if anybody's interested in trauma, then please contact me. Get a hold of me, and I also do a free consultation between wendycassina.com. So thank you for helping me explain that, Ian.
Thank you, Wendy. An absolute pleasure as always. So thank you for just giving me the opportunity to talk about these things. And thank you so much to all those people that have listened and viewed. And I hope there's something that's really been of value to people as we've gone through today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and please will you subscribe to our channel as well on YouTube? We would really appreciate that as well because it helps you to know what kind of topics are coming up, which might be of real interest to you. So thank you, and thank you for everybody for listening.